And I think for the audience to understand, what he's talking about, guys, is you figure out what your maintenance calories is. So, like, if your maintenance calories, let's say for easy numbers, is 2,000, you need to put yourself in a deficit. Menno, how much of a deficit should they be in to optimize fat loss while simultaneously maximizing muscle retention? Because, right, when you put yourself in a deficit, this is where you start to get into the scary land of losing muscle mass. How much of a deficit should they be focusing on?
It depends primarily on your body fat percentage.
Okay.
If you are obese, then you don't need to worry about your body fat. You don't need to worry about your energy deficit. You needed to be lean yesterday, and your body's not going to burn any muscle when it has that much fat that it can burn instead. If you're overweight, don't push it to extreme levels. Like 50% is very aggressive, for example. Mm-hmm. Most people never end up in that much of a deficit anyway, so it's still not a big deal. And when you get to some athletic body fat levels, and there are a couple studies on this by Garf et al., for example, from Norway, and they found that in athletes, so people, healthy body fat percentage, not overweight, not necessarily bodybuilder ripped, but just healthy body fat range, then most people want to be in like a 20% deficit. Because if you still diet very aggressively, then you're just going to end up losing a lot of muscle. In general, you cannot go wrong taking it slow with more of a lifestyle perspective, because then, you'll lose all fat and maybe you'll recomp a bit as well. But if you want to optimize things, nobody likes dieting, so might as well get it over with. Then for many people that are at a healthy body fat level and they just want to get a six-pack, for example, then 20% is usually an approximate ballpark figure that works for many people.
Okay, so 20%. So let's say their maintenance calories is, for simple numbers, 2,000. Should they be pretty much going in a 200 to 300 calorie deficit, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, so you'd be like 1,600 calories in that case. That could be the case for a woman. Guy with 3,000, or beginner at indeed 2,000. Then you're looking at, say, 1,600. For a more advanced guy, you're looking at like 3,000 maintenance maybe, and then 2,400 for the diet.
Okay. And that's every day to hit that number?
Yeah, on average.
On average. Okay.
We can talk about the calorie spread and everything. By far, the most important is just the average spread over time. Not so much, what you do on one day versus the other day.
That is so important. And real quick, because I've talked about this before, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that. A lot of people tend to worry about, okay, I need to be in a calorie deficit every single day, which obviously is important, and you should do that. But should people really be focusing more on like being in a calorie deficit for the week versus being in a calorie deficit for every single day? Because, people might get anal, might cause, them to get anxiety, go crazy. Should they be focusing more on like, all right, as long as I'm in a calorie deficit overall on average for the week, for the month, etc., is that what they should be focusing on more?
Yeah, for sure. It's like money. Dieting is a lot like spending money or trying to save money. How much you spend on a single day, it's not so important. You have a certain salary per month even, or per week, per month. And that is basically what you have to spend. If you want to save money, you need to be under that, or you need to be under your salary in terms of your expenditures, right? So it's the same with dieting, that you have like an energy expenditure for the week as a whole. And if you're under that, then your body has to get rid of some energy. You have a lot of flexibility in how you distribute that across your days. So it's the long run average energy expenditure and average intake. The balance between those, that determines whether the body has to burn energy or whether it's going to store energy.
Okay. So baseline, put yourself in about a 20% calorie deficit. And then if you're, with a higher body fat percentage, you're obese, you can go up to, what would you say is the max range that they could go up as far as deficit goes without messing themselves up?
As obese, you don't have to worry about it. Just get your protein in and do strength training. Don't deprive yourself of essential nutrients.
Yeah.
And other than that, most research finds that the more of a deficit you can achieve, the faster you lose fat.
Okay. So would 30% be appropriate for maybe someone that's obese out there watching?
Yeah. Basically, I would say as much as you can sustainably implement in your lifestyle.
Gotcha. To maintain the deficit long term and not go crazy with cravings and binges. Okay. Can you talk about, since we're on the topic of weight loss, can you talk about the importance of protein intake and it's in that in comparison to other macronutrients like carbohydrates and fat? Because a lot of people tend to, maybe cut carbs altogether. They don't prioritize protein. Can you talk about how important of a macro protein is?
Protein is extremely important. I co-authored the latest meta-analysis, or one of the latest, on the requirements for strength trainees and the effect on lean body mass development. And it's huge. In terms of protein, compared to the other macronutrients, the other macros don't actually matter that much at all. But protein has a huge effect because protein is what your body needs for, well, not just muscle mass, but for almost anything. Protein comes from the word proteos from Greek, meaning of first importance. Your body, it's like the worker bees of your body. The proteins, they do almost everything. All the functional stuff in your body is done by proteins. It's in digestive stuff, your heart, your liver, everything needs protein. And your muscles are one of the organs that rely in very significant part on protein to build and to function. So you need a protein intake as a lifter of at least 1.6 gram per kilogram or about 0.7 gram per pound.
Okay.
That's total protein intake per total body weight.
Bare minimum.
Yeah.
Bare minimum. So 0.7 per pound, 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, or you said 1.6 per kilogram?
Yeah.
Roughly, for my European people out there.
Yeah.
Now, so I guess we can get into the diets, right, a little bit here. You got your people that swear by intermittent fasting. You got your people that swear by ketogenic diets.
Keto.
You got your people that, swear by paleo or vegan or whatever it may be, and they're all running around saying that my diet's the best and beating their chests. I call them diet zealots. If you equate protein, right? Let's say you take someone that's intermittent fasting versus someone that's doing keto versus someone that's doing a regular traditional diet, just, if it fits your macros, so to speak. Is there a real difference in body composition changes if you equate calories and protein overall?
Very little in most scenarios. Things like fasted training, those are probably not great.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're distributing calories and protein somewhat equally across the day versus fewer meals, like at least 3 meals spread across the day, after that point, there's essentially no further effect of the timing, or at least you're talking about very small effects. Whether you do fasting or not, especially if you're not training fasted, doesn't affect fat loss either. Again, it's the means in the end, and people, because of the culture wars, people take a lot of pride in, basically they're confusing the evidence and the culture wars, where people think I'm an intermittent fasting person, or I'm a keto person, I'm a vegan, I'm a carnivore, and it becomes part of their identity, and they stop looking at the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't realize that the intermittent fasting diet, I also like intermittent fasting, but it's not my religion,
Yeah.
I just do it because it's a tool that gets me my to the ends that I want, which is reducing my energy intake.
Yep.
So fasting helps me by not eating, reduce my energy intake. And I'm typically not hungry in the mornings. So it's easy not to eat in the mornings for me. And that's the case for a lot of people. So intermittent fasting in that sense is a tool that allows me to reduce my energy intake and thereby helps me lose fat. And that's been confirmed now by numerous meta-analyses, studies, a very large body of literature, especially because intermittent fasting is completely blown up in the last years.
Yes.
It's now super popular, but there's more evidence than ever that it actually doesn't do anything special.
So what is your, because I agree with you 100%, but I've had people even come in and say intermittent fasting is the best, and it's the reason why I've lost weight, etc. I've always looked at it like the bottom line is being in a calorie deficit, and intermittent fasting simply helps you get there in the easiest way, because when you cut out, food for multiple hours of the day, it's much easier to hit your target goal of being in a calorie deficit or whatever your goal is, if your goal is to lose weight or whatever. Basically if you equate protein and calories, there's virtually no difference in body composition changes. What about performance?
Also not if you're not training fasted. So there have been a couple studies by Grant Tinsley et al., which looked at strength trainees doing intermittent fasting type diets. And they found no appreciable differences between groups. If you are training fasted, we recently conducted a study that's yet to be published, where we found some detrimental effects on strength development. There was also a recent study on Ramadan, during the last Ramadan, where they looked at people that trained fasted versus people that didn't train fasted. So they broke the fast before they did their workout in the evening later. And they found that it was better to do the workout after some food, which, is not too shocking. In that case, there was some confounding by fluid intake. In our study, there wasn't. So I don't think it's simply fluid intake that is the issue. It just makes sense that if you don't have any carbs, you don't have any protein, your body is in a catabolic state, and mTOR enzyme, for example, it's like a regulator that in your muscles, it's an enzyme. It looks at all the anabolic factors that are at play. Is this guy on gear? How effective was the workout? How much protein do we have? And it sends a signal deeper inside the muscle that stimulates the whole growth process. And if there are no amino acids available, then mTOR is going to say, well, look, we want to build muscle, but there's no substrate. Like, we don't have the building blocks. It's like you want to build a house, but you don't have the equipment for it. So you can't. And you're just going to have a very suppressed growth response. And there's a limit to how much your body can compensate for that, say, the next day.
Wow. So training fasted could actually hurt you long term.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. What would you say to combat that? Because you know, a lot of people swear by training fasted, right? What would you say is the optimal, I guess, pre-workout meal then, I guess, to kind of allow people to train in a state where they can, you know, optimize hypertrophy?
I mean, a lot of it is just mindset, because you don't need a big meal. In our recent systematic review on carbohydrate requirements, we found that just 15-gram carbohydrates is probably sufficient, especially if you're not doing like super insane workouts.
Okay.
So
not much.
That plus.
So that in itself is enough to just get to get it where the mTORs are gonna, I guess, when it sends a signal out, it's not gonna fall on deaf ears, if that makes sense.
Exactly. And protein intakes, like 20 grams high quality protein is good. 0.3 gram per kilogram is really all you need. So for most people, at 20 grams, and you're fine. And it's super easy to get that. A lot of people have this mindset issue, really, that they cannot have a meal, or they have a certain concept of what a meal has to be.
Mm-hmm.
If you wake up early in the morning, you're not hungry, and that goes for me, for example. When I was a business consultant, I woke up at 5 or something to go to the gym before work. I'm not hungry then. So I would just have some slices of chicken, for example, like grilled or smoked chicken, and a piece of fruit. Like that's, you can literally stuff it in your mouth when you're walking out the door, and it doesn't take any time to prepare. You can literally take it out of the fridge, grab it, eat it while you're in the elevator, done. You can also have a shake if you prefer that, if you want something liquid. The issue with shake is that they're not very satiating, so I'm not a big fan of shakes, but it can get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is a matter of just finding something that works for you and is convenient.
Nice. Real quick, guys in the chat. Guys, it's fnfsuperchat.com. If you guys want to, because you got an expert here. If you guys got questions, get your questions in now. We will definitely go through and have a Q&A portion here. So get your questions in now. Rumble rants, all that stuff. Sorry, Fresh. Go ahead.
Yeah, recently Dana White did a 86-hour water fast, right? Question for you when it comes to fasting. Is it better to fast on water only, or certain food groups you would say, what's better for fasting if you're going to fast?
Well, water is certainly better than no water. But in terms of food, 6 to 8 days is way beyond what's scientifically considered even remotely optimal.
Right.
Because you don't have protein intake during those days. There's a concept in science called a protein-sparing modified fast. And that's basically the entirely superior version of complete fasting. It means that you essentially minimize your energy intake, but you do get your protein in. And if you get your protein in, then your body has the means not to lose muscle. And then you can still have a super high energy deficit. And here's the kicker. You're actually going to lose more fat with the protein-sparing modified fast than a complete fast. Because the energy that you consume from the protein, now in theory, at least, if you consume just protein, in practice, you'll also have some other nutrients, but let's say theoretically, you really only consume pure protein. What is your body going to do with that protein? Well, up until the requirements, it's going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. That is going to stimulate energy expenditure because it costs energy to build muscle proteins, to build all types of proteins. So what happens is that none of that energy that you consume from protein is going to be used for gaining fat. None of it's going to be used for energy as long as you're not consuming excessive protein. It's going to be used to fuel muscle protein synthesis. Your energy expenditure goes up and your effective energy intake doesn't go up because all of that energy is used for MPS, for muscle protein synthesis, rather than for fat storage. So you actually lose a little bit more fat and your muscle retention is way better and you're not starving as much and it's better for your health and you get essential nutrients in. So PSMF, protein-sparing modified fast, is simply completely superior from a body composition point of view than actual complete fasting, like not eating anything, regardless of whether you're consuming water.
And that was a very polite way of saying that it's bullshit. You know, obviously he's keeping it scientific, but, you know, I've always been extremely critical of these water fasts, these stupid-ass long-term fasts. I've always said that they're not optimal if your goal is to, you know, build an aesthetic physique. And what, I guess, man, what is up with the explosion of these fad diets, you know, of people, you know, I'm not going to eat anything for days, or I'm going to be on a snake diet, or I'm not going to do a water fast, or I'm not going to eat any carbohydrates. Like, why have these ridiculous diets become so popular versus just simply tracking your calories and getting adequate protein?
I mean, people like new things, people like magic fixes, people like ideas that aren't complicated and they feel some hack. They don't want to learn about calories. They don't want to do the hard work. They don't want to go to the gym. You know, there's a difference between people like to hear and what people need to hear.
Yeah.
And with fitness, that is extremely true. Now, if I had to throw a bone to the fasting crowd, I would say that the fasting crowd has taught us that the body can fast for much longer and function effectively for much longer than the mainstream believes. Because if you ask anyone in like, Gen Pop, okay, how long do you think you could go without any food and still perform fine on an IQ test or do your job and those kind of things? Many of them would probably be like, oh, a couple hours, my brain starts to suffer, I get hangry and whatever. And no, it's not a couple hours, it's a couple days at least. So, and it can be weeks and months even. I think the longest therapeutic fast on record is about a year. It's 365 days or something.
Wow.
That is with some essential nutrients supplemented, I think, but no real energy intake to speak of. So if you're morbidly obese, there is a lot of energy stored and the body can use that very effectively. So that's the only thing I think I would say is good that we can learn from that movement. But yeah, it's not optimal at all.
Good to know.
So what are your thoughts on people that restrict carbohydrates from their training? Are they shooting themselves in the foot? Is that optimal to getting shredded quickly? What are your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't recommend not having any carbs pre and post workout, but we recently did a systematic review where we found that, like I said earlier, you only need about 15 grams of carbohydrates before the effect on performance becomes moot for the vast majority of trainees.
Okay.
So you need a little bit, but you really don't need much. And your total caloric intake also, or your total carbohydrate intake across the day and across time, for most trainees that are just doing strength training a couple times a week or even daily, is not very important. Your body can very adequately resynthesize the glycogen, which is the stored form of carbohydrate in your muscles, very effectively via other mechanisms. So you don't need to load it with carbs, which was the kind of the previous bro idea, and what endurance trainees do actually need to do, because they burn way more carbs than strength trainees.
What do you think? So we talked about adequate protein intake. What about adequate carbohydrate intake to maximize gains?
Yeah, it's not high. In our review, we found that in the vast majority of long-term studies, there was no effect of carbohydrate intake on strength development or muscle growth.
So, okay. So someone that's on keto can absolutely kill it, just like someone that's on a traditional diet.
Yes, absolutely. If you get your calories right, your protein intake is high, then even a ketogenic diet in most of the studies is, which in fact, most of the studies are on keto diets. They don't do like 20% carbs versus 40. They always go with very extremes. And you see that keto diets can actually be very effective to build muscle and to lose fat. The only caveat I would say for muscle growth is that we've seen a lot of research, and you see that anecdotally as well. If you're on a keto diet and you want to build muscle, it can actually be a little bit overly hard to get all of your energy in, so all of your calories in. Because if you have to bulk on 4,000 calories or higher
of protein only, that's tough.
Yeah, just protein and fat, that's just difficult.
Yeah,
you're gonna be drinking olive oil or some shit.
Yeah, because foods that are typically protein dense are very satiating, like chicken and fish and all this other stuff. Like you can only eat so much of that stuff, and it's low calorie, so you're gonna be full all the time doing that.
Exactly.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Do you have
I got a question real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So listen, man, I want to get results in the gym. I'm a beginner. I'm on my way up, working on it. But I've been wondering, man, you can help me here as well. Might give me some good notes, but I want to hear your take on this. So when it comes to like a beginner in the gym, right? Obviously, you need time in the game, have experience, have a, knowledge of, for example, dieting. But at the same time, people come to you offering you, TRT, steroids, different peptides. What's the best formula or best way to get gains before having to use, I want to say, steroids? Or what'd you say?
Most important for muscle growth is that high protein diet, consistently working hard in the gym, going multiple times, high effort, decent volume of training. That is by far the most important. And I would say for the vast majority of trainees, the biggest problem with going to peptides or steroids, most peptides don't even work, but steroids or anything, is that if you don't have the basics right, then steroids are actually not going to do as much for you as you would think.
Nope.
Yep.
So a lot of people think that, just, take some gear and boom, I'm fucking 4. No, doesn't work. You still need to work hard. You still need to get your protein in. In fact, a lot of what gear does, for sure, you get some muscle growth from just being on testosterone, but you also get a higher ceiling of muscle protein synthesis, so you need more protein. You also get higher recovery capacity, so you can benefit from training even harder. And that's what the bodybuilders do. Yes, they're on a lot of gear. Yes, they have good genetics, but also they still work extremely hard. They have their diets in order, and they do that consistently for year in, year out.
It's like they already have the good fundamentals and the good habits, and it allows them to use those good habits and train even harder and increase their capacity. Like I've noticed when you look at like old school bodybuilder training splits, right? Like Arnold and, Yates and, Tom Platz, all these guys. Like if you looked at their routines, they train each muscle group once per week, but they would do like 50 sets. Like they would do crazy volume. And you're like, what the hell? A regular person will probably get destroyed by that. But if you're on, enhanced, you're able to recover from that and just beat yourself up. And your capacity to, like you said before, to overtrain is almost, gone, mitigated completely with the gear use, which allows you to get more gains.
Yep.
So, man, let me ask you this, since we're on the topic of sets and volume. Let's talk about that.